Okay, we're going to do the back torso now. So for this, you're going to want to cut yourself 22 by 34 inch piece of pattern paper, like I have here. And you're going to need your back bodice sloper. Alright? What I want you to do is trace off your back bodice sloper and create a working pattern of it. Here's my working pattern of my back bodice sloper. So on the back bodice sloper, first thing we want to do is label the intersection of side seam and waist with an X. Okay. And the other thing we're going to do is we're going to measure off of our side seam 2 inches and draw a line. From waistline all the way to armhole, like so. Okay? And this will be a slash line here, but we'll do more with that in just a few minutes. Okay, so let's go ahead and start drafting our back torso. What we're going to do is take your yardstick and about an inch, inch and a half from the edge of the paper, go ahead and draw a line about the length of the paper. There we go. You can label that center back. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to measure off from the right side of the paper about 3 inches. And mark 3 inches. Label that mark A. Okay, now we're going to square off of A. Let's go ahead, take your square, and we're going to square a line right off of A. So line up the short edge of your square ruler with your center back line and bring the long edge right against A. And we're going to draw a line longer than we need it. So I'm going to draw about an 11-inch line or so, maybe longer, 14 inches. Okay. So let's measure off of A 10 1/8 inches. Okay. So this is our back hip arc. All right. So our back hip arc measurement is 9 5/8, and then we add a 1/2 inch ease, and then that gives us 10 1/8. All right. So let's measure 10 1/8 away from A and mark, and label this mark B. Okay. Remember, this is 10 1/8 inches. Okay. Now let's measure our hip depth, okay? And that's going to be the same as our front hip depth, which is 8 inches. So measure up from A 8 inches and mark. And label this point D. Alright, so let's square off of B now. Here's B. I'm going to square up off. We're going to label this. This is our hem, just like on the front. That's our hem. So we're going to square off our hem line. And let's put the short end of the square on the hem and bring the longer end right to B. There we go. And let's square a line up. Okay. I'm going to make this line about 10 inches or so. And now we're going to square up B 8 inches. Or measure up B 8 inches. And right there. Okay. Let's label this point C. And now we can connect D to C, creating the waistline. Okay, we've created this lower torso of our torso sloper. Let's just measure and make sure this all works out. And we have a box here. That looks good. And then this should be 10 1/8. Yep. That looks good. Alright, so here on our center back, we want to measure up from our back hip depth, okay, and that is 7 7/8. So I'm going to measure up 7 7/8, right there. And we're going to mark that. I'll mark that in red so you can see the difference. Okay. One more thing we want to do is at C, remember on the front, we measured in 3/4 of an inch. We're going to do the same thing here. So I'm going to measure in 3/4 of an inch at C and mark. There we go. Okay, so now we can take our back torso sloper, our working pattern rather, and we're going to line up our center back with the center back of the draft, and the intersection of center back and waist is going to match up with this lower mark. Okay, that was 7 7/8 for me. So that red mark there. So let's go ahead and line those two points up. Bring this up. Okay, that looks good. Once you have it in place, go ahead and just tape. There we go. One more thing I'm going to do is I'm going to extend my C line out about another 4 inches, like so. Alright, so now we can go ahead and slash up the slash line we created, going from waist to armhole. And remember, don't cut all the way through armhole, just cut so you can create a hinge. No slick. Okay, so now that can move. Okay, so now what we want to do is remove this out. We're going to bring it back in, and we're going to keep moving it until the intersection X, this point here where waist and side seam intersect, touch this waistline. So here we go, and right there. Okay, so let's go ahead and tape that in place, like so. Okay. Alright, so now we can go ahead and trace off our working pattern. I'm going to start at neckline, center back and neckline, trace out. Come down my shoulder line. Make sure you mark all your notches for your shoulder dart. And come down here, armhole. And I'll just trace down side seam a few inches and then stop. Okay, I want to make sure I get my notch here as well at armhole. Transfer that. I'm going to transfer the tip of my dart at shoulder. We don't need the one at waist, so it's good. And now I can remove my working pattern. Put that aside. Okay, so let's go ahead and start truing this pattern up. I'm going to start at neckline. I'm going to square in from center back at neckline 1/2 inch. And then I'll use my curve ruler to get the rest of the neckline. So I'll blend in from that 1/2 inch point up. I'm going to mark my dart, so I'm going to find the center fold line and connect that to the tip of the dart. There's the tip of my dart. I'm going to tee off right there. And now I'm going to connect that tip of the dart to the dart legs. And I'll finish truing my shoulder. And we have a little bit of straight line there. Notch at armhole. And I'll use my curve ruler to get the rest. Okay. So now I need to finish my side seam. At intersection of armhole and side seam, I'm just going to tee off for like 1/4 of an inch here. So this intersection where side seam and my armhole meet, I'm going to connect to my side seam, or to this mark that's 3/4 of an inch in from C at the waistline. And I'm just going to do this in red. Then I'm going to measure up from him up 2 inches on what's the side seam, just like we did on the front torso, and mark that 2 inches. Okay, I want to make sure I have the same exact hip curve as I did on my front, because these are going to sew together eventually and I want them to match. So what am I going to do? Largen the ruler facing up, place 11 at that 2 inch mark, and then bring this curve ruler in until I touch the mark at waist. Very good. And connect those 2 points. Okay. Now again, I don't want this sharp of a point, so what am I going to do? I'm going to do the same thing I did on my front. I'm going to place number 1 on my waistline and just move it in until it touches the side seam, like so. And I'll draw in a nice smooth curve. And now I can just blend into that. So again, 11 here. And this hip curve will blend right into there. And place this ruler and connect, create my side seam. Alright, there's our side seam. Alright, our darts, we're going to give ourselves a couple guidelines like we did on the front. First thing we're going to do is we're going to measure down from the intersection of armhole and side seam. We're going to measure down 1 inch and mark on our side seam. Okay, we're going to square off our center back now and bring our ruler down or up until we touch that mark. Okay, we're squaring off center back, and we're going to draw a nice guideline, and this will be the top of our dart, so the dart tip. Okay, now we're going to measure down from our waist 5.5 inches. Okay, so there's 5.5 inches, and I'm going to mark, and I'm going to move out and measure down another 5.5 inches, mark, and now we're going to connect those 2 marks and square off the side seam, and that's the guideline for the bottom of our darts, our dart tips. Okay, now from center back, I'm going to measure in 3.25 inches. Okay, so 3.25 inches from center back. Let's measure in, and I'm going to mark. All right, and now I'm going to square that mark up and down. This will be the first fold line, or the fold line of my first dart. So I'm just going to intersect slightly with each of those guidelines. Alright, so that's the first fold line. That's the fold line of my first back waist dart. And now I'm going to measure over 2.25 inches. And find the second center fold line. So 2.25 right there. Mark. and then square that mark up and down as well. There we go. Okay, let's find our dart intakes here. So we're going to measure out on each side of these fold lines, dart fold lines, a 1/2 inch and mark. There's a 1/2, there's a 1/2, and the same thing here. 1/2 inch and 1/2 inch. There we are. Okay, let's connect these marks to the tips of our darts, creating our dart legs. Okay. Remember, the dart tips are going to be right at the guidelines. And I always like to tee off right at the tip of the dart. So just draw that in black so we know it's permanent. Okay, we're almost done. Let's put some information on here so that we know what we did and what this is. All right. So this is my back torso. It's a sloper. Put your name and the date. One other thing we want is the size. Remember, it's a size 10. Alright, and remember, do not cut this out. Okay, this is your draft. This is what we're going to make our sloper from, and we never want to cut this out. Okay, so now it's done.